That's the voting on shortly. Elizabeth, I think is the one I would be there. Is that all right? Good. All right, friends, thanks for coming. If I can encourage you to move as close up front as you could, that would be great. But you can stay there if you need to. But quite good at that. Well, you need to close. I have this, so cover this. All right, friends, thank you so much for coming. I'm grateful for this opportunity to kind of give you some information about where we are and then field other questions. I'm going to begin by just sharing a little bit of what the process here is, so that everybody's kind of clear about that. All right? So more than a year ago, the member ministers at the Stevens Memorial United Methodist Church concluded, after lots of prayer and discernment, that they could not continue on as a separate church functionally, and so they thought that the pathway that would be best would be to have the church close. Many churches have closed in the broader United Methodist Church and in the New York Annual Conference in recent years. I am a member of the conference trustees, and so that's part of what the conference trustees do. The bishop said, we would prefer, please don't close. Instead of closing and selling the property, we would like to have an opportunity for ministry to continue in this region, and that would best be served, we believe, by having you merge with the Jesse Lee Memorial Church. And so at that time, and in conversation with the district superintendent, they said that they would be willing to merge without any other specific details in kind of an amorphous world. We then formed, and they formed, some small groups called a merger task force in order to look at what that would entail. And one of the first and initial tasks was to kind of get a sense of what the assets and liabilities are, what the financial status was. So Mark Rabinowitz was one of the chief members of the task force to help kind of figure that out. And that took some time to do. And they gave a report some months ago now. When was that? In February? So in February, there was a report that they gave, and there's some, and they can share more about that. But essentially, that report said that all things being equal, given a reasonable amount of time, that a merger would not financially impact Jesse Lee negatively to the best of the initial assertions. There are some nuance there, certainly. And so then the church council said, all right, well, that's good. The church general rules are do no harm, and so that sounds like a good thing to know. What's the good? What would be the reasons that would help us to discern whether this is a leading of God and some benefits that would take place there, aside from the fact that the conference and the bishop has asked us to do that? And so over the last few months, we've been invited to consider whether visions or a vision for ministry incorporating the Stevens campus and the ministries and resources there would be in order. And so there have been some town halls, there's been there's been some pathways and possibilities meetings with both Stevens folks and Jesse Lee folks over the course of the last several months in order to kind of have those things emerge. So that's where we are today. The pathway or possible pathways forward. There was to be a church council meeting tomorrow night. We've postponed that a week to May 13th to make sure that some of our administrative leaders who have been deeply connected to this are able to attend. There were some conflicts. So on May 13th, the church council will meet, and if they choose, there can be a motion to recommend merging with the Stevens Church. There can be no recommendation. There could be a recommendation not to merge. The church council doesn't have to do anything, but that's kind of where we are. If there were a recommendation to merge, the merger document that would allow that to happen is something that Matt Medeiros and others have been working on, and that would be fine-tuned. And the entirety of the congregation of Jesse Lee would be invited to a church conference, like a charge conference, except all members have vote. And the entirety of the Stevens Memorial United Methodist Church would have a separate charge conference or church conference in order to ratify the merger agreement with the presence or the direction of the district superintendent. That only happens if there's a recommendation to do that. And just because there's a recommendation from the church council doesn't mean that the broader church agrees to do that. So we're moving the process to try and be as informative as is possible. So that's the process as it may unfold, could unfold at this point. Is there any questions about the process? Great. So at this juncture, I just want to say welcome to everybody who's watching this on the live stream, and there will be an opportunity for those persons, if they have questions or comments, to get those to us so that we can respond to those. I may be sort of like the goalie, which means that I'll kick the puck back into play. I may or may not think I know the answer, but there may be other persons who have been doing much more of the legwork, and they would be better prepared to give answers. So this is a town hall to see what questions or concerns or celebrations or opportunities that you have and want to lift up as we proceed down a pathway of discernment toward maybe some action. So anybody got questions or observations or things? Yes, please, Karen.
What are the implications of the merger for operating the South End property?
So if a merger took place, the guidance and the expectation of the merger document is that it's more of an absorption than it is a merger, that the property and members and liabilities and assets of the Stevens Memorial United Methodist Church would become a part of the property and assets and liabilities and resources of Jesse Lee Memorial United Methodist Church. We would be a church with two campuses, and those proceeds would be under the authority of the administrative leadership of Jesse Lee Church. So all of the trustees that are Jesse Lee Church trustees would continue to be that. There would not be new election of new leaders until our fall charge conference. And the incorporation really is kind of folding into Jesse Lee. So that's a great question, Karen. Did that answer your question?
Does that mean we are committed to keeping those properties the way they are now?
In the same way, thank you. So the question is, are we committed to keeping those properties in the same way? In the same way that we hold all of our current assets, the parsonage at 544 North Salem and the buildings here, they're ours in ministry. We are in and a part of the United Methodist Church, so we can't sell property without letting somebody know that we're doing that. That has been the case. When we sold Canton Hill, we said this is what we're doing and why we're doing that, and they were informed and said fine. That would be the same deal. So we are not under an obligation to say we need to keep this property in order to do these things. We're not under obligation to continue ministries, but we're wanting to be in dialogue and in conversation with the persons in South Salem. That region of ministry within the cooperative parish is already a part of our ability to respond, which is my way of saying responsibility. Did you like that? So that's, I hope that answers. Yes, George?
Is there a vision as to how that property can be used?
So George is asking a question, is there a vision as to how that property could be used? I'm gonna ask and say, does anyone here have anything they want to share about that? We've had some meetings to talk about that. Many ideas have emerged, some I think with greater kind of aspirational, somebody could do that, and some with maybe a little bit more energy of I would like to be involved with that. So does anybody want to offer anything before I offer anything? Okay, so part of what we have experienced, we had good turnout at the Pathway and Possibilities meeting, is people I think are noodling things that could take place there, but it takes some time for those to emerge. There is a burgeoning need, both in Ridgefield and in South Salem, for support of older adults. The population of 65 plus persons has doubled in both areas since 2010 and is projected to double again between now and 2033. There is not a lot of support and resources for older adults in South Salem. We are blessed here, in part because of some of our own membership in the ways that we've advanced Founders Hall. But so some ministries and connections with the Lewisboro seniors, we've been in some conversation with them, and I met with the town supervisor. So there are some possibilities along those lines. There's been discussions about a camp. Camp Quinnipiac operates a camp on Shelter Island in Long Island, but their camp counselors are not fully utilized all summer long. They have kind of an intense full camp in the middle of the summer, but the tails and some of those camp counselors might be available, and we're in dialogue about potentially having and using the Stevens space or other church spaces in order to provide a place for underutilized kids. There's been conversations about thrift shops or other kind of connections, and that impacts some of our staffing questions. As we all recognize, Pastor Thomas will be going on to other leadership, and so how will we cover our staffing needs here, and what kind of places may that impact in the future? So I would say, others can offer, that there's lots of interest that's been shared, but people have not stand up and said, I definitely want to do this, and I'm going to lead this ministry if that happens. The folks that I've talked to are a little reluctant to kind of jump in with both feet along those lines. Yes?
I understand that they have a trust, Stevens has a trust. Is that specifically earmarked for specific usage, or could that be used to also help in the upkeep of the church?
You want to answer that, Mark? You were looking at me like you might want to answer that.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I think for this conversation, the trust is not really significant enough. For this conversation, the trusts are not significant enough to sway somebody's decision. I wouldn't say yes or no because of the trusts. There's money there, and I think there's ways of making that money continue, but it's not definite, and it will take some work to figure out if the people who actually have control of the trust want that to happen. So it's a maybe, but I don't think it's really a determinant factor one way or the other.
Okay, so for those who are listening online, Mark said maybe. That there is monies there. There are 2 trusts or bequests that have some guidelines along those lines, and the expectation from the merger task force is that is not the predominant pathway in order to make the decision. There's somewhere between $30,000 and $60,000 and some other potential dynamics that might be, but there's other things that need to be kind of clarified. So under the best of circumstances, there's $60,000-ish that would come, and that would be utilizable for the maintenance of the campus there, and the United Women in Faith have authority over those proceeds for missional stuff. But the merger task force is not recommending that you make that a significant part of your decision-making process. Is that fair? Okay. Other questions? Yes?
So, for the last several years, Jesse Lee has run Jefferson. And as I understand this project, much more needs to be done, which would increase that deficit. So as you look out a year or two from now, what happens to combined resources assets? I realize that on a longer term basis, if you did something with the property, you could but in 2 years, you're only $250,000 to $400,000 in the hole. And where does that go?
So thanks, Keith. Keith is pointing out that for the last couple of years, we, by design, have been spending more than we've been taking in order to try and initiate some ministries. And so we've been in deficit spend. And the question is, there is some needs there at Stevens. Matt can speak, I think, more specifically to some of those as related to, projections of maybe as much as $250,000 or so if that included subdivisions and so forth. Are we in some kind of risk along those lines? And would somebody want to speak a little bit about how we came to the conclusion that this was not a threat to a larger deficit in the long run, if I understand correct.
Well, actually, that one short. I understand the long run, if you take something with property. But in 2 years, how deep does our hole go? And where does the money come from?
So let me, because people are hearing, there is an initial expectation of an amount of money that would need to be spent in order to have the property functional without subdivision and all that kind of stuff. How much is that in a ballpark? What's that? Give me what not significant means.
$50,000.
Okay. So
That's just like, yeah, just like, yeah.
So the projection is about $50,000 in order to keep things status and kind of get us to a kind of a functional place. The other things that make that number bigger are part of the process of subdivision that would assume ministries that would be done because we're investing on the front end in order to allow those to take place. Does that answer your question?
Now the second part, so the 50,000, if you did the other investment, where did the funds come to do the other investment? I guess is the question.
Because the church has unrestricted funds from Tangier Hill. If the decision was made to move forward with subdividing the property or whatever.
It's awfully hard to.
Okay, I'm gonna interrupt in the middle and translate. Okay. We sold Canton Hill, and that has given us an opportunity to have some cash available so that we could make investments in this longer range ministry. So the answer is that we would be putting those funds forward, and the task force's assumption is that we could afford to do that if the church council supported that for a short-term basis, and funds would be coming back to us through a variety of pathways in order to not have us floating that money for a significant period of time. Other questions or thoughts?
So what are some of your ideas? I was at the luncheon, many of us were at the luncheon where a whole list of possibilities for that property were put on the board. And we've only heard two things mentioned this morning. What are your ideas in terms of how you see the property being used and reasons for doing it?
So thanks, Dale, for asking a question about my ideas, and I have many of those. One of the things that's, I think, important, and I'm prepared to share those, and I have, I'm excited about some of those possibilities, but I don't want to be too much in front of you. I think that one of the advantages that come with this property in this space is to see, I saw what happened here when we received the carriage house, and the process by which energy and ideas sparkled up. I would very much like there to be contemporary worship and opportunities to kind of spread that. And that might be a part of a Stevens pathway. It might not. You know, we're going to have services here. We've got some space here on this campus as well. So part of that is an expectation that ideas are also going to come alongside, in addition to things that I feel very strongly about, which is this awareness that there are significant numbers of older adults who are getting really no support, no opportunity. As the Surgeon General said, we have an epidemic of loneliness, and there are not places that provide opportunities. I met with Rudy Marconi to talk about that, and he said, "Sorry, Rudy, if I'm quoting you out of context. It's the problem with talking to me." He said, if you put in a pickleball court or two over there, people would love that. The Lord Jesus has not said, "Thou shalt go forth and make pickleball courts," but I'm aware that maybe that is a pathway that might be celebrated. So, I see needs in a bunch of different directions. I think clothing and textile recycling can be a really helpful thing. There's no easy place to do that. I know that our construction ministry sometimes can appreciate having additional spaces. I'm not creative enough to tell us all of what might emerge there, but it's 16.8 acres. There are some wetlands that are part of that constellation, and I think the bishop and the cabinet thinks that this is a wonderful opportunity for some real good ministry to happen because of who we are. And I don't want to run ahead of you. There's a couple things that I think make this compelling. And another point that I would make is if we just made the initial investments to stop whatever degradation there is, the value of the space is still going to be the value of the space in 2 or 3 years. And so if we needed more time, without much loss along those lines, we have some time to kind of see whose energy and ideas also come up, which I'm excited about. Is that not a good answer? I mean, I may love to have a cup of coffee and talk more specifically, but I don't want folks to say, oh, well, Bill wants this, and so we can't do that. That would be unhappy for me. Yes, and then Deb. Deb.
As we talk about some of these things with seniors and all of this, even if, let's say, we do the investment of the stuff to get it up to where it needs to be used well, okay? How are we going to have somebody on the property to oversee activities, insurance? What's the liabilities that are going to come back to us?
Great question. So what's kind of leadership and oversight, and what are the insurance and other things along those lines? The larger dynamic is that we are, and Matt can speak to that as well, we've looked at those things, and those are a part of the equation, and there are some costs there. If I'm correct, I think we think that those are manageable, but Matt, I'm happy to have you say more, please.
Broker that we use.
I'll tell you why, because I'm not going to understand enough to, so there you go.
Okay, well, so Mark's probably better speaking to the insurance part, but thankfully they use the same broker that we use, so we can basically fold their policy into our policy. So they've got the same coverage that we have here from an insurance perspective. As far as overseeing the property, they have a caretaker on campus now. He actually lives in the house that's part of the property. And I think he's a great asset. He knows the property's been there since the 90s. And I think he probably takes care of it more than any other person over there. Like very, very much cares about the future of that property. And I think we should continue to make use of his services. He's on site. He can be someone there that can make sure that the property's not being misused. He is a volunteer, and for that he gets free residence at the house that is on the larger parcel that the church owns. If he's a volunteer, it is. If he's
There's some nuance.
there is some nuance.
I think some of these kind of concepts may be important for everybody to understand, because I think it can make a difference, and it may be a good difference.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something more? Yeah, so, and just for those who've not been there, so we're clear, there is a house. That's where Pastor Thomas is living now. There is a hall that has 2 floors with four spaces and then an office downstairs. There's also a residence where the caretaker and his wife live. And then there is a significant amount of dandelion-free green grass there, and some wetlands as well. So, depending upon what happens staff-wise, there may be some other things that we're making use of for staff at Jesse Lee or for other purposes. So those things are a little bit in flux until SPRC and others say, how do we want to best use those properties, even in the cooperative parish. Those are questions. The reason Thomas has been living there is because this is a part of the cooperative parish, and we were able to take advantage of that building being there, and that allowed us to because we had 3 parsonages here with the one on campus and 544, which we're renting. We were able to sell Tanton Hill because we didn't need 3 or 4 for 2 clergy. Yeah. The cooperative parish will, I think, officially change later this afternoon at the district conference, where I'm preaching, by the way. case, it was a shorter sermon here today because, so, even a little more, there's more to add in Hyde Park. But the cooperative parish is shifting. We've had two churches, Zion's Hill and Stevens, who had a pastor last year, and effectively since November, I have been kind of giving pastoral care and support there. There's a church in Pound Ridge, and they have a pastor, and then it's been Thomas and I. Beginning on July 1st, unless something changes between now and this afternoon, New Canaan United Methodist Church and the Westport Weston, that's one church, will also become part of the cooperative parish, and the new cooperative parish coordinator will not be me. It will be the Reverend Heather Sinclair, who has been serving in that role for the Southern Fairfield Cooperative Parish as they join. She's the pastor at Westport Weston. So there will be more in the cooperative parish, and the shape of the churches in the cooperative parish will be part of that responsibility of the cooperative parish council. So Mark's asking me a great question that I don't really want to answer, but I will give it my best shot anyway. So if we do not merge, is the condition, and if the decision then is to have Stevens not go to the conference and not be sold, it would be still in some form within the cooperative parish. And if that was the case, would Jesse Lee then have first dibs or rights to that house if we wanted it for additional staff? And the answer to that question would be, I don't think so. The cooperative parish would need to make those decisions about how to utilize something that is the cooperative parishes. And that's where we are right now. It was easier for that decision to be made in the direction that it went when I was in charge, but I won't be in charge in July. Yes?
This may be premature, but looking beyond council and ministries next Monday night and what decision is made there and the discussions around that. A number of years ago, Newtown inherited from the state of Connecticut Fairfield Hills, which was a psychiatric hospital with 25 or 30 different buildings on it, much larger footprint than what we're talking about now. But is it reasonable to think that the conference would consider if we chose not to become involved? And I'm just like, would it be possible to approach the communities in which that property lies from a gubernatorial point of view and see if a committee can be set up to determine how those communities might want to use that property? In other words, could they take that building and turn it into a very active community center for their citizens? Could they build a Little League field for the kids that may not have one or need another one over there? The reason I say that is because after a lot of discussion, and the reason I know a little about this is because I was working in Newtown at the time, and the presidents of our company were very active in that transition. And if you've driven through on 25 and gone down that way, they have now built a new firehouse on that property. They have built an elementary school. They have built a huge recreational building. They have built a couple of restaurants. They have built a new town hall, all on that property. Much of it using the buildings that were there and retrofitting them, not knocking them down. And I'm just wondering if an alternative down the road, if this doesn't come through, what do you think? I don't know, we don't know. But would the conference support that as a backup plan if we decide that many of the services that we're suggesting for that property could be done here? And we eliminate the artificial New York-Connecticut border. Could those people over there take that property and use it to their best advantage?
So in short, Dale is asking, is there a way that the community could have more opportunity to use the property for services that might impact the community and that we wouldn't necessarily need to be a middle person in that? Is that a short summary?
Yes.
Okay. So the answer to the question is yes, that certainly is possible. Here's reasons why I don't think that that is likely to be a viable pathway. The first is, I don't know how to say it, Oniatu or Oninatu Farm is across the street, and that's where social services and senior stuff is, and there's a fair amount of property there, and there's been some discussion for a number of years of developing that property, and there still may be, but they've not. So I don't think that what they would say if there are things that they want to do as far as fields, there was lacrosse game there as we went last time, and there's some parking, but I don't think that they're looking and hungering for additional space initially. The second is, I'm sorry to report this, but Methodist churches, main denominational churches are not thriving. Is that news to anybody? And so the conference trustees are already managing a significant number of properties, and we do try and find ways to have alternative uses that can help the community, and sometimes that means selling to somebody who can help the community. But I don't think the conference is likely to have the bandwidth in order to do a lot of managing. One of the things that we have done is a lot of the legwork, which creates other possibilities. The conference's perspective, the bishop's perspective, is the best opportunity for ministry to continue or to happen in South Salem is because the talent and call and sense of commitment of Jesse Lee's investment would make that happen.
This will end up being a multi-year process. And one of my main concerns is the bandwidth of this church or Stevens. And the question I had posed to you is, who is going to lead this? Not saying we're going to have a committee of campus, but who is going to, when we did the carriage house, Peter really led and did an awful lot to drag that through and make that work and all the rest. Who is going to be key? It could be you, but I mean, somebody's got to say, I got 3 or 4 years to spend on this thing. I'm going to make sure it happens and it's going to be successful.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Is there a point person or a small group of folks that are willing to take lead on this? I don't want to say no, because I think that there are some individuals, I think you're aware of some, who have expressed some desire to say, yeah, I'd like a chance to kind of take some movement and some leadership along these lines. But we're figuring out. What's that? Okay, so I wasn't looking to call out Rob on that, but I did hear Rob say that.
I think it's a great opportunity. I'm a builder. I work for a developer. I see land. I want to do something. I think it's an opportunity for this church to do something special. And so I'm going to.
I would much rather have had you had the microphone for that. But what Rob said is that he's a builder, works for a developer, sees the land, and there's some excitement and energy along those lines. And some of that, in my estimation, comes in obvious ways up front, and some of it takes some time to kind of bubble up. That was part of our experience. So I don't know the answer to all of those questions, but I believe you're satisfied. Okay.
It was Sunday and I had too much coffee.
We're doing God's work. I think in my conversations, one of the things that I have discovered is it's hard to get persons 1 and 2, so I'm really glad. It's easier to get persons 3 and 4. Persons 15, 17, 20 are super easy. Because this, if it happens like the carriage house did, is going to be fun. We're going to have a good time envisioning, and right answers will come at the right times. I think, if I've heard the merger task force correctly, that we're not forced to eat the whole elephant on day one, that we can take small steps. And there are some things that we need to shore up. Making the building accessible opens up certain possibilities for ministry. We need to make sure that the water is in good shape and that there are other dynamics. And there's some initial investment that needs to be made along those lines. But beyond that, we don't really have to do until we're ready to do. That would be my 2 cents along those lines. Yes, Steve.
You indicated that there's a 42% reduction in the worldwide central conference. What impact does that have on our annual budget?
That's a great question. What's the impact of the reduction of the General Conference budget on our budget? I have a better shot of praying an answer to that question than I do in figuring out math-wise. The conference apportionments that we pay come in part from the General Conference apportionments. So that section of our conference budget will be reduced. But at the same time, there are churches closing. There are adjustments in conference staff and ministries. And so there are enough variables that I cannot say what that will mean. The thing that I want you to know is that the General Church did not say, this is a time for us to move forward with a brand new initiative, and so we are increasing apportionments in order to meet the times of the need of the world by 100%, and we're passing that along. The General Church has said, we are going to be leaner and more efficient, we're combining agencies, and we're going to work with 42% less than what we had budgeted for before COVID and disaffiliation. And we'll see how that unfolds as the time goes by. I appreciated that Steve said as we draw this meeting to a close. Did you notice that? But I want to make sure that Kirby and others get an opportunity to ask questions. But if you need to leave, please don't feel compelled to stay just because I'm standing up here in a suit and not a robe.
What's the contribution of Stephen's church going to be? Have they given up altogether and gone away? Or are there people there who are interested in preserving the church who are going to work with us and contribute to it?
Thank you, Kirby. I love that question. Kirby's question is, so are there folks from Stevens who are invested in some variety of future ministry in that area? And if you asked me that question a little more than a year ago, I think that the direct quote that I heard from many of them, and if they're listening, you can write into Elizabeth and tell me, which is they were tired and did not see something that would have a deep investment from them. I'm not sure that is the same case. There were more than 10 folks who came to the Pathways and Possibilities luncheon there. There were about that same number, and not the same people that came to the contemporary service last week. I've had conversations with several who were beginning to think if we move into the next phase of ministry and leadership, how they may be a part of the leadership of the broader Just Lead Church if that takes place. So in addition to some programs, I think that there is some investment in some broader ministries. I don't think that they're reluctant to say, yes, we want to take a lead here, knowing that the will of this church might be that this is a bridge too far and we don't want to do it, and not wanting to be in a place where they're going to be disappointed. But I sense some energy there. They've been doing a lot of very hard administrivia or administration stuff for a long time, and that is not, I know this will be shocking to some of you, but that does not always make everybody's heart all aflutter. And so an opportunity to be a part of a ministry that's caring for neighbors is maybe a little bit more exciting than figuring out how we negotiate a reduced cost for electricity. Any other questions, concerns, opportunities? Yes, George.
Will the royalties continue?
Will what?
The royalties from the Red Nose Reindeer.
Will what continue?
The royalties.
The
The royalties. So the answer to that question, I think Mark's answer is, his answer is this. My answer is, I hope so, and I think there's a good likelihood that they will, but the trustee of the United Women in Faith, and that's a separate body that's connected to the church, but she's 99, and it's not clear exactly what happens to the trust when she's no longer able to be the trustee. but there's nothing to indicate that that trust should, in one form or another, not become available to Stevens eventually once they sort through that. The Stevens Trust, as long as the church continues to function in a way that meets the trustees' expectation of what a church does, will continue, but there's some moving pieces along those lines. So I'm hopeful. My retired Ernst & Young partner is saying, don't count your chickens before they're in your hen house. Is that all right? So that's what I have there. Any other questions or comments or concerns? So who's invited to the church council meeting on May 13th? Everybody's hand can go up. You're all invited. The members of the church council have right to voice and vote, but everyone, and I've invited folks from Stevens as well, they can come as well, and you can be a part of listening, and if the chair and the body agrees to grant you voice, you can even speak. So none of this is designed to be kind of hidden in any capacity. And the church council will make a decision about if it wants to decide and what that decision will be, and then there will be a larger process if anything moves forward. Is that clear enough? Okay. So with that, I would be grateful if Reverend Stubbs would offer us a prayer, and then we'll head off into the day. And anybody who wants to be at Hyde Park at 3 o'clock, you'll see me again.
I'll be there. Well, would you pray with me? Gracious God, you entrust us with so much, even as we acknowledge the ways in which being entrusted with things is challenging, and making decisions about them can be difficult. And yet, we attempt to do so, O Lord, as a community, as those who have a share in this call to ministry which you have placed upon each of us. And so we pray in this time and in all times for your wisdom and discernment, for a spirit which draws us to other voices and makes us mindful of ways in which you might be at work, which are just beyond our current field of vision. Help us, O God, to do what you would will, and to find your work in the midst of that work in which we find ourselves. All of this we ask in the name of the one who gave himself for us, and in so doing has given himself to us, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.